Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to this stage the amazing Nora Ephron, Rebecca Traister, and Allison Stewart.
I want to start our conversation tonight with a little story about a not really well-known professor in 1976 who was writing a piece about women in history about puritanical funerals and women, really exciting stuff, until she got to this one line she wrote, and it was, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." It was Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who's now a professor at Harvard, and that phrase was repeated by a journalist 20 years later and picked up by young feminists and put on bumper stickers and T-shirts. We've all seen them. So, Rebecca, does this apply to women seeking political office?
Yeah, I mean, quite obviously, I think we see huge numbers of ill-behaved women, and actually that's one of the interesting things about some of the women who may be very unpopular with this audience, but I've developed a kind of rugged admiration for, say, Sarah Palin.
Because she goes rogue.
Well, despite the fact that I disagree with every word that comes out of her mouth. Mm-hmm. The fact is, the thing that made me become a supporter of Hillary Clinton is that she was defying every prognostication. I did not start out in 2008 as a supporter of Hillary Clinton, but then I kept watching her make everybody go nuts because she wasn't abiding by any of the rules. They kept saying she'd be out by Super Tuesday, she'd be out, but, and she wouldn't leave the race. And she was driving Chris Matthews around the bend, and
that's not hard to do.
I know.
That's not.
And everyone was so pissed off, and I was like, you know what? She's hilarious. This is fantastic. And it made me, I mean, there was more to it, but that was part of what I admired about Hillary Clinton, and for that matter about Barack Obama. When you had different kinds of people in the race, they didn't have to behave according to old scripts. And in a sense, watching Sarah Palin, especially as she's become less and less of a threat, and therefore it's a lot easier
to be amused
by her.
Yeah.
I mean, she doesn't follow any scripts. And I think there was a very smart piece by Mark Leibovich in the Times this weekend about comparing her crazy, crazy bus trip to Mitt Romney's announcement that he was going to run for president. Mm-hmm. And Palin wins that. I mean, as far as being entertaining and changing the way, sure, it's sort of reality show, presidential style, but that's not necessarily so much worse than the, Harkin steak fry that has the model of how people have become president or politicians in the past. So yes, I think women behaving badly makes for good, fun politics.
There's a project called the White House Project, and the goal of the White House Project is to get more women to run for office, to get more women in local seats. I'm going to just read from their website. By filling the leadership pipeline with a richly diverse, critical mass of women, we make American institutions, businesses, and government truly representative. Add women, everything changes. That's their motto. Why, Nora, why haven't more women gotten involved in the political process? We've seen the number of women in Congress, well, this year it decreased, right? It decreased this year,
by
right?
like 0.5%.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, what do you think holds women back from running for office?
I don't know. What are the statistics in terms of governors and local offices? I can't answer your question because mm-hmm. when I was growing up, there were no women in public office. Mm-hmm. Margaret Chase Smith was in public office. So even though there are only, 14 women in the United States Senate?
17.
17. That is 17 times the number of women. So, I feel as if it's slow, but it's changing. Women are in politics, and nobody, it used to be that in order to get elected to almost anything, your husband had to die. Right. And then you got his seat. That was how a lot of senators, women senators in the 50s and 60s ended up in the Senate briefly. Mm-hmm. But that's not true.
Though that was going to be, I mean, not the death part, but that was the Hillary Clinton model. When everybody talked about Hillary Clinton as part of a dynasty. It's very interesting that that is how all the first women got. And before the 50s and 60s, back when the very, very first women, sort of pioneer women in the pioneer states, in the western states, some of them got elected to office first, and it was because their husbands had held a seat. And everybody was very upset about the idea of a Clinton dynasty for good reason. But in fact, that was just, as the first woman, she was just following one of the only models that has allowed women to get into office in the United States and elsewhere, but especially in the United States.
I do want to read something from your book, because you talk about the women's rights movement, and it's in the chapter, the D word, from Nora's book, I Remember Nothing. You write, my first marriage ended in the early 1970s at the height of the women's movement. Jules Pfeiffer used to draw cartoons of young women dancing wildly around, looking for themselves, and that's what we were all like. We took things way too seriously. We drew up contracts that were meant to divide the household tasks in a more equitable fashion. We joined consciousness-raising groups and sat in a circle and pretended we weren't jealous of one another. We read tracts that said that personal is political, and by the way, the personal is political, although not as much as we wanted to believe it was. But the main problem with our marriages was not that our husbands wouldn't share the housework, but that we were unbelievably irritable young women, and our husbands irritated us unbelievably. Tell me a little bit.
And your question is
about, well, about going through what you were going through during the women's movement.
Well, I think, I think that the women's movement of my era of the 70s was many things, but one of the interesting things about it, and I think Robin Morgan said this, was that divorce became a political act. We had all gone to college, at Wellesley. The motto of the school was non ministrari sed ministrari, which was not to be ministered to, but to minister. But it was always, the big joke was not to be ministers, but to be ministers' wives. And if you were really interested in medicine, you were supposed to marry a doctor. That's what almost everyone in my generation thought life was about, was that you married your life. And so, and we all entered into marriage, we all changed the rules. We all pretended we all thought that's what we were supposed to want, and then we got very cross because it's not a good deal. So then we all stopped doing all the things we were, and everyone walked out. It was just a wave across the country. I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, really. And divorce is a very interesting subject. I mean, as we've started a vertical on Huffington Post about divorce because as I always say, marriages come and go, but divorce is forever. But it is, it is like reproductive choice. It is something women were not allowed to do. It's amazing how brief the history of divorce is. It was impossible to get a divorce until this last century, anywhere, and in some places you still can't get one. And so I'm just completely riveted by it as a subject. And we all are. We all love reading about other people's divorces. But
Nora Ephron and Rebecca Traister.
Thank you so much.